To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
What if going to work meant never coming home? On a chilly February morning in 2005, 43-year-old chemist Geetha Angara walked into her job at the Passaic Valley Water Commission in New Jersey, just like she did every other day. But this day, she never walked out. Her coworkers searched everywhere when she didn't return from a routine task. And when they finally found her, she was at the bottom of a massive water tank, the very tank she was there to keep safe for millions of people. Was this a tragic workplace accident or something far more sinister? This is the mysterious death of Geetha Angara, a case that remains unsolved today, leaving behind a grieving family, unanswered questions, and a forensic puzzle almost impossible to crack. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 291, The Death of Geetha Angara. Before I get into the strange details surrounding her death, let's talk about who Geetha was. She was born in India, where she excelled in school from a very young age. She even became the first woman in her school's history back in India to earn both a bachelor's and a master's degree in chemistry. She eventually moved to the US, where she earned an additional master's degree and a doctorate in organic chemistry. As you can already imagine, she was known as being incredibly smart, hardworking, and driven. At the time of her death, she was working as a senior chemist at the Passaic Valley Water Commission in New Jersey. But beyond her impressive career, Geetha was also a wife and a mother to 3 children. They all described her as gentle, kind-hearted, and deeply committed to them. She was someone who never hesitated to help others, and she took her role in ensuring clean drinking water for her community very seriously. I think that's something a lot of people take for granted, clean drinking water. Geetha was that person. Her job at the PVWC was to lead the project that changed the way that particular water plant purified its water. She made sure that millions of people had clean drinking water every single day. To those that knew her best, Geetha was cautious and careful in everything that she did. She wasn't the type to take risks, especially not at work. And that detail becomes really important as we dive in deeper into what exactly happened to her on February 8th, 2005. On the morning of February 8th, Geetha arrived at work at 7:30, like she always did. Then at 9:45, she had breakfast with some of her coworkers. It was during that breakfast that one of her coworkers mentioned that one of the plant's filters and sensors needed calibration. So Geetha agreed to go out and take some water samples. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. This was essentially part of her job. So after breakfast, Geetha grabbed her clipboard, a beaker, and her 2-way radio. She was off to go get those water samples from the tanks. Behind her, she left a sandwich on her desk that she planned to eat for lunch. This was apparently something that she did a lot, so her coworkers didn't think too much about it. Except this was the last time she was seen alive. That evening, Geetha was supposed to take one of her daughters to a basketball game, but she never showed up. She also never answered her cell phone. But it wasn't until about 9 o'clock that night that anyone at her work noticed that she never returned from checking that water tank. At around 9:20, one of the night security guards noticed that Geetha's car was still parked in the parking lot. This was hours after she was supposed to be off. Her sandwich was still sitting on her desk, her coat still in the closet. But none of her coworkers said anything all day long. So it was just before midnight when she was finally reported missing to the police. Everyone began searching the water facility, thinking that maybe she had slipped, fallen, or somehow became injured. But as the hours passed, there was still no sign of her. The only things out of place were some broken glass in the tunnel system leading up toward the water tanks, and one of the tank hatches was slightly open, but no one thought much about it, even though this was the exact area where Geetha was supposed to be taking those water samples. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the water facility's supervisors had shut the plant down, and a dive team was brought in to help search the tanks. And when they lifted the slightly opened hatch that they had seen earlier, they found two things inside: a broken beaker and Geetha's two-way radio. Throughout the rest of the day on February 9th, the dive team kept searching the tanks, and by 6:30 the following night, they had finally found her, floating inside of one of the water tanks. She had floated from a 1-million-gallon tank to another smaller one. She was dead. The tank she was discovered in was about 30 feet deep, but the escape panel was about 5 feet above the water's surface. So even if she had managed to stay afloat, it would have been impossible for her to reach the exit hatch. Then there was the water. It was recorded at 36 degrees Fahrenheit, so very, very cold. And here's another thing. That particular tank had an alarm system for this very thing. If one of the workers had accidentally fallen in, there should have been an alarm that went off immediately. But that alarm apparently wasn't working at the time. So when Geetha fell inside, no alarms went off, and therefore no one was alerted about the situation. But everyone has the same question. How did she get inside that water tank in the first place? When her body was recovered, it showed signs that raised even more questions. The medical examiner determined she had drowned. She was still alive when she went inside the water. There was water inside of both of her lungs. But here's the stranger part. There were also bruises on her waist and elbows, suggesting she'd been in a struggle. Stranger still, her neck had even deeper bruising, suggesting she might have been strangled. But the crime scene itself presented huge challenges for investigators. Because the water was treated with chlorine, any potential forensic evidence like fingerprints, hair, or DNA had been destroyed. Even the broken glass that was found near the tank earlier that day had been inadvertently thrown away. The environment inside the tank had essentially washed away anything investigators could use to try to figure out what happened here, or who might be responsible for this. It was as if her body had been placed in the one location that would erase every possible clue. There was also the issue of the scene itself. By the time Geetha's body had been discovered, the scene was trashed. Firefighters, dive teams, paramedics, police investigators, employees, dozens upon dozens of people trampled over everything. It was a complete nightmare from a crime scene preservation standpoint. From the moment Geetha's body was recovered, authorities treated her death as suspicious. The bruising on her neck, waist, and elbows immediately raised red flags. So even though her official cause of death was drowning, the medical examiner ruled it a homicide, saying that her injuries suggested she had been involved in a struggle before entering the water. This simply wasn't an accident. This was murder. The police began looking closely at the plant itself. The Passaic Valley Water Commission was a massive facility with almost 100 employees. It also had strict safety protocols. It's also a secure facility, so investigators wondered if their suspect could have come from within. There was also only a small window of time during which she could have been attacked, but the place also had major security gaps. At the time, there were no cameras covering the area where Geetha disappeared. Police began by interviewing her coworkers, trying to figure out if anyone had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. And as they dug into the deeper workplace dynamics, they learned there was some tension throughout the plant. There was a lot more going on than just silly workplace drama. Before all of this happened, Geetha had recently received a promotion in which she became in charge of the plant's transition to ozone-based water treatment. And this decision seemed to cause some friction. Some of the employees didn't agree with her receiving this promotion, while others didn't agree with the switching of the water treatments. So there was noticeable tension around the plant. Of the 83 total employees, 50 had come to work that day. So the police focused their attention on those 50 people. They felt pretty comfortable that their suspect had to be one of them. As you can imagine, tension at the plant would have been high. One of their own was just found murdered on the property, and now every single one of them, all of the employees, are now considered a possible suspect. Access to the water plant was extremely tight. There was only one driveway to get inside, and the main access gate was staffed with security. So no one who didn't have business being there could access the water plant. Most of the property was otherwise fenced off, and the gate itself was monitored by cameras. And a search of the security records showed that no one was in the facility that day that hadn't been cleared. From there, the police focused their attention on two of Geetha's female coworkers, who were widely known to have disliked her. But no one really thought they'd be capable of something like this, capable of murder. So the police moved on to a different theory. The killer was male. Because of the strength needed to lift the tank's hatch, it seemed more likely that a male was involved. Although that's not to say a female couldn't do it. So now the police focused their attention on a group of 8 males who had been near the tank area around the time that Geetha disappeared. But there was always one common theme. Most of them really liked Geetha. They thought she was a really good person to work with. So when it came to a possible motive, no one knew what it could be. About a year later, the police had narrowed down that group of 8 to 3. One of them was the coworker who had first noticed Geetha was missing after going to check the tanks. And according to the police, none of the 3 men had solid alibis. They also had access to the exact place where she was discovered. So you've got means and you've got opportunity. But again, as far as a motive, nothing really stood out. But regardless of a motive, all 3 men were asked to take a lie detector test, and each one of them produced very different results. Suspect number 1 passed, suspect number 2 inconclusive results, and suspect number 3 simply refused to sit down and take the test. But despite the extensive questioning, despite the polygraph test, despite taking DNA samples from these 3 individuals, there was nothing. The chlorine-treated water had destroyed any potential biological evidence on her body or her clothing. So none of the 3 men could be linked to anything. In 2006, the Environmental Protection Agency conducted searches of the water tanks to make sure that nothing had been missing. But the searches turned up empty. Nothing was found at the bottom of the tanks. Investigators even looked at another case from 1968 in which the body of 22-year-old Joan Freeman was found in a hallway at another nearby water plant. And just like in this case, there was very little forensic evidence at the scene. There were no fingerprints found on the mallet near her body, and the knife used to cut her was never found. And just like in Geetha's case, the police never found a motive for Joan's murder. So the two cases lined up. And just like in this case, Joan's murder is still unsolved even after all of these years. But so far, there's no evidence suggesting that these two cases are connected. At this point, investigators had to consider the possibility of an accident. Could Geetha have somehow fallen into the water tank? And if she did, could that have produced the forensic evidence seen on her body, the signs of strangulation, the bruising? To try to answer that question, the police turned to a Scottish forensic pathologist named Derek Ponder. He is widely considered one of the few experts in the field of drownings, especially when it comes to those that occur in cold water. And based on his research, he says it is possible to see bruising on a victim's neck and even petechia on their eyeballs in these types of cases. Drowning in very cold water can cause some of these injuries that we see in Geetha. There are also injuries that closely mimic post-mortem strangulation. But some of what this expert has said has raised some criticism. Number one, he never personally examined her body. And number two, he never actually went through any of her autopsy records. So his research might suggest that these types of injuries can happen in these cold water drownings, but never really looked at Geetha's case specifically to say for sure. But this expert wasn't the only one to say this actually might have been an accident. James Wood was the chief homicide detective for the prosecutor's office when Geetha died. He even worked the case for 18 months until he retired in 2006. But by the third anniversary of the case, James Wood seemed to change his mind. He wondered if Geetha's death wasn't the result of a homicide, but rather negligence. He suspects that the tank's plate may have been removed before she came to the room where it was. The New York Post reported that on the day of Geetha's death, the state had ordered some testing on the water as a result of some pinkish discoloration seen in the tanks. Normally, the necessary water sample would be collected by machines, but one of the supervisors at Geetha's plant was old school. They preferred that people take the water samples themselves, not machines. And in order to do that, you have to remove the plate. So James Wood wonders, could someone have simply forgotten to replace the plate? Once Geetha got to the area, which is already pretty dark, she didn't see it and she accidentally fell in. But no one wants to come forward to say that they forgot to put it back because they don't want to be blamed for what happened. But of course, that's just one possible theory. And if you asked Geetha's family, they adamantly reject this idea. They completely reject the theory or the idea that this could be an accident or the result of negligence. They say Geetha was always careful, never taking risks at work, and that the tank hatch was too heavy for her to lift and open by mistake. So now investigators are at a standstill. There were no eyewitnesses, no surveillance footage, no physical evidence tying anyone to her death. For forensics teams, it was the ultimate nightmare. So the case quickly turned cold. Nearly 2 decades later, Geetha Angara's death remains unsolved, leaving behind multiple theories about what really happened that day. I've touched on some of these possibilities already, but let's dive deeper into each one and see what the forensic evidence actually tells us or doesn't tell us. Theory number 1, homicide. The most widely accepted theory is that Geetha was murdered. She was alive when she went into the tank because she had water in her lungs. She had bruising on her body, suggesting a violent struggle before that. And she also had bruising around her neck, consistent with strangulation. So the theory goes, someone followed Geetha into the tank area that morning, waited for her to become busy or turn her back. They surprised her and attacked her. She tried to fight back. She's strangled and ultimately ends up in the water. The water is freezing. She can't get out because she can't reach the top plate, which is about 5 feet above the water line. She's essentially trapped and eventually drowns. Under this theory, the most likely suspect is one of her coworkers, one of the 50 people who worked that morning. Whether it was an argument that turned violent or a premeditated attack, supporters of this theory believe she was either forced into the tank or rendered unconscious and placed inside. The fact that no one saw or heard anything raises questions. Could someone have waited until she was alone, knowing that there were no cameras nearby? Was it an act of revenge for her role in the plant's recent operational changes? Some coworkers reportedly resented her leadership in transitioning to ozone-based water treatment, believing it threatened their job security or their routines. We also know that while Geetha liked her job, she didn't socialize much with her coworkers. Other than a few that she worked with closely, she just preferred to keep to herself. So did her silence turn people off? If so, would something as small as that create enough motive or enough anger for murder? So this seems to be the theory that the initial forensic evidence supports, mainly because of the bruising. But when it comes to forensic evidence, that's it. Other than what Geetha's body looked like, there's zero forensic evidence proving this was murder. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers, nothing linking any one particular person to what happened to her. Whoever was responsible, if this was murder, left behind no trace. Theory number 2, accident. Maybe she slipped while checking the tank or stepped into an unsecured hatch cover that gave way underneath of her. Now, while none of that explains the signs of strangulation, it might explain the bruises on her arms. It's possible she bruised herself while either falling into the tank or sometime inside while trying to get out. There was also that expert's testimony that this type of bruising can and does happen in cold water drownings. These bruises can sometimes resemble choking. So if she had accidentally fallen, either because of negligence or because of something else, maybe that explains the odd injuries. There was also the broken glass found in the area, possibly from the beaker she took with her. Maybe she had dropped it at the same time she fell into the water. But again, her family completely rejects this theory. They say Geetha was extremely cautious at work and would have never walked near an open tank without proper safety protocols. Also, the hatch. Investigators don't think she could have opened the hatch on her own. It was simply too heavy. So when it comes to the forensic evidence, it doesn't seem like it supports this theory. Theory number 3, something else happened. While researching this case, I came across something online. Some people wonder if suicide could be a possibility. Maybe Geetha knew exactly what she was doing that morning. But once again, her family and friends say that there was no indication she was struggling mentally or emotionally. She was happy in her personal life, proud of her career and excited about upcoming family plans. Then there's the very scary possibility that whoever harmed Geetha knew exactly what they were doing. By placing her body in the tank, they ensured any forensic evidence, fingerprints, DNA, fibers, would be destroyed by the chlorine-treated water. It was the perfect location to erase any trace of the crime. At this point, I don't think any of these theories can be taken off the table. Nearly 20 years after her death, Geetha Angara's case remains unsolved. Despite an extensive investigation, no one has ever been charged in connection with what happened to her. Her family, determined to seek answers, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Passaic Valley Water Commission, arguing that the facility failed to provide a safe working environment. They believed there were serious security and safety lapses that contributed to Geetha's death, whether it was an accident or a homicide. In 2015, a decade later, the New Jersey Attorney General's office reopened aspects of the case, hoping that advancements in forensic technology or simply just a fresh set of eyes might bring answers. But ultimately, that review didn't produce anything new. Today, forensic experts continue to weigh in on her death. Many agree that the injuries on her body suggest foul play. But without any physical evidence or eyewitnesses, the case remains at a frustrating standstill. Her family continues to hold out hope that someone, somewhere, knows what happened that day, and that someday they will find the truth. Geetha Angara was a brilliant chemist, a devoted wife, and a loving mom of 3. She spent her life keeping drinking water safe for hundreds of thousands of people. And yet, nearly 2 decades after her death, the question of what happened to her remains unanswered. Was she the victim of a tragic workplace accident, or was she murdered and her killer has walked free all of these years? The lack of forensic evidence has made this case nearly impossible to solve. The chlorine-treated water destroyed any potential DNA or fingerprints that could have pointed toward her killer, if there even was one. Her death is a stark reminder of the limitations of forensic science in certain environments. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, there are cases where the evidence simply isn't there. But beyond the forensic puzzle lies a grieving family who lost their mother and their wife. They deserve answers. They deserve to know the truth. If you know anything about the death of Geetha Angara, or if you've heard something about this case over the years, please consider reaching out to local authorities or crime tip lines. Even the smallest detail could be the piece needed to finally solve this case. To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to hear my personal take on the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode where I share my personal thoughts on the case in more detail. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you never miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, please consider leaving us a positive review. It helps the show grow. You can also support the show through Patreon. Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to tune in next week for a new case. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to help create new compelling cases, fund research, and assist with production and editing costs, you can support the show with a small monthly contribution. In return, you'll be one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensictales. Forensic Tales is made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Marianne C., Lois B., Lynn H., Ashley H., Danielle D., Chrissy D., Brett R., Luz Raquel, and Christine K. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or email me at Courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.